Welcome back, everybody. Today I've got a video on the idea of coaching and powerlifting and strength training in general. We're going to go over a couple topics as far as do you need a coach? At what point could a coach help? What lifters benefit from a coach the most? And just in general, what can a coach do for you in your strength goals? So we're starting off with what are the goals of a coach, right? And if you think of yourself as a lifter, in order to figure out what the goals of having a coach may be, you have to kind of go through some introspection on yourself and think about, hey, what are maybe my weaknesses as an individual, and how can those weaknesses possibly impair my progress moving forward? So the first and, in my opinion, most important thing that a coach does is a good coach will bring balance to your training, right? And more importantly, balance to not only the physical aspects of your training, but the emotional aspects. And we'll get into that in a couple minutes. But depending on what kind of lifter you are, you might need a coach who can bring you down when things are a little too high, or who can pick you up when you're feeling a little too down on yourself, for lack of a better term. Now, the second thing here is a coach can bring education and experience to you that you may not have as a lifter yet. And even if you do have education or experience, such for example, I have 9 years competing in powerlifting. I have a background in biology and physics, right? So I have a solid education background, but having a coach such as myself can amplify, my education. My coach, Bill McCarthy, he amplifies that whenever we bounce ideas off of each other, and he has even more experience than I do. Something I do want to note, I think in the online world, sometimes this gets this outweighs the education, right? We see, oh, this lifter lifts a lot of weight, he must know a whole lot. That's not necessarily the case. Or if someone's in great shape, that doesn't mean they know nutrition very well necessarily. They might have insane genetics, they might have gotten somewhat lucky. Maybe they just work very hard and they're not using principles that are properly planned, but they happen to look that way. So be careful when you're selecting your coach. Be rigorous on, hey, what's their education background and what's their experience. And a good coach does not have to be a national or international level powerlifter by any means. So kind of keep that in mind. That's the second thing they bring. And then lastly, we've got objective decision making. So that comes back around to balance. As a lifter, you always have subjective glasses on, and you are seeing your training through the lens of being inside, right? And a coach should be able to look in from the outside and make decisions for you objectively, even when you don't feel like it's right or you want to do something else. The coach can say, hey, let's back off on that, or hey, that was a little too easy, let's be more aggressive. And these three things are the true value, right? And of course, coaches can do other things such as emotional support and maybe helping you with technique, which comes back to education. All right, so now that we have the idea of, hey, what are these foundations of what a coach should be doing for you as a lifter, we also have to think about the lifter themselves, right? Each lifter is going to be different in what they need, and a good coach should be able to adapt between those lifters. Now, to really simplify things, the way I think about it is all lifters or people training in the gym are going to fall somewhere on the sliding scale of personality traits, where on this side we have conservative nature, and that might be someone who does a set and they get out from under the bar and they're thinking in their head, oh, that was kind of hard, we shouldn't push it more. But to everyone on the outside, they can see the difficulty actually wasn't that hard, right? And these might be the lifters who tend to reel things back or take it easy just in their nature, right? Whereas as you go up this scale, you get into more aggressive lifters, and I don't mean physically aggressive here. I'm talking about in their training, right? So on the extreme end, you might have the person who wants to max out every single time they enter the gym, right? They're trying to push themselves to failure, and that's how their brain works to progress in their mind, right? And the extreme on either side of this is going to have its own pros and cons. I've seen many people who are far on this side really passionate about powerlifting, and they push it every single day. And what kind of happens? Burnout, right? Or injuries if you're super aggressive. And then if you're far on this end, you're not going to have enough drive to make you progress in the sport. So they struggle with progress and then they get discouraged that way. So it's helpful for you as a lifter to take some time and think, where are you on this chart? And then hopefully you can get a coach who balances you. Remember that first goal as a coach was to create balance. You know, if you are on the conservative end of things, your coach can then push you, kind of take the aggressive stance and say, hey, no, we need to do a little more, push a little harder, add a little weight. Or on the other end, if you're wanting to push it to failure all the time, it's a coach's job to say, no, let's reel it back. You're doing too much. Okay, you don't have to lift every day, and to ground you, and that'll save you from injuries and hopefully that burnout. So this is what I keep in mind as I'm thinking, hey, how can I be helpful as an athlete towards my coach, and what can I get from my coach? It's nice to be cognizant of these two things. And overall, if your coach is not bringing balance to you and bringing education to your experience, then, you may have to consider, is this the right fit for me? After looking at, what is the job of a coach? What are you looking for out of a coach? And what kind of lifter are you? And what are you going to need from a coach to kind of bring balance to your programming? Let's wrap it up with, is a coach for you, right? And there's a few things you need to take into account before you go ahead and dive in and hire a coach for yourself. One of the first things is budget, right? How much money can you allocate for your training each month? Powerlifting, or any other strength sport for that matter, is not a cheap endeavor, right? You have to pay for your gym membership, your equipment, your food, right? A coach is another expense onto that, but kind of going down to the goals at the bottom, depending on what your goals are, if you want to become an international or nationally competitive lifter of some sort, then it's probably worth the money, right? And budget probably isn't as big of a deal. With that said, you can get to the national level and beyond without a coach. So it's something to understand, but there will be limitations. Second, what is your experience level, right? If you are brand new, okay, you're going to need some sort of guidance, but you can educate yourself with outside material first and foremost. And there are a lot of training templates that you can certainly follow. One of the first ones that I followed early on was the Wendler 531 program, right? And things like that are great to build that experience up, especially if you're on a budget. Now, with that said, if you don't have a ton of experience, but you don't want to commit the time to the research, then a coach can be a great tool to bring that education and experience into you. And then lastly, you have to take a deep, hard look at yourself and say, what's my personality, right? Some people are too aggressive to write their own programming, if that's the route they choose. And some people are way too conservative. So if you're on one of those extremes, then a coach could really help you. Now, even if you're in the middle, getting a coach can help amplify that and propel you forward. So with these four things, you can then write out a pros and cons list, see if having a coach is right for you. I would truly take the time to interview coaches and go through this process. Don't just pick one at random, and stick with one for a long time. The longer you're with a coach, the better they can apply principles to you moving forward. All right, so thank you all for watching. Take a moment, if you would, to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.